Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I'm doing great. So
Good.
I doubt you're going to get this. You may get the state, but I doubt you're going to get the location. So let me just move out of the way here and let you
Well,
look.
that's not Yellowstone, is it?
It's Half Dome.
Yes.
Deirdre, that's
That's
Half
what I
Dome.
thought. That's what I thought. Yellowstone. So I've
Yeah.
got that. Hmm.
No, that's Half Dome in California.
Oh,
You're just looking at it from over here towards here.
okay.
That's the Half Dome.
Okay.
Yeah, boy, I didn't realize I'd stump you. I thought this was a given that you would have caught the Half Dome.
Well, because you see structures like that in
Perspective.
Yellowstone
Maybe
as
maybe it's
Oh,
easier to
no,
see this way.
Yosemite. Yosemite. That's what I'm thinking about.
Oh,
Yes.
you were saying Yellowstone and meant Yosemite.
Yes.
I believe
Regardless,
that.
you stumped me. You
I
stumped
believe no, I believe that. You've got so you also you've changed your background. You've moved. You've moved.
Well, no, no, I have work going on in the house, outside the house,
I see.
and I moved to a little bit to get away from some of the noise, but our listeners may hear a drill bit or two during this. But
This
anyway,
I'd rather hear a drill bit, I think, than uh, a leaf blower.
very definitely, very
Although
definitely.
they are both a little bit troubling. I can't believe I. Yeah. I believe you were thinking Yosemite and saying
Yes,
Yellowstone because
correct.
I can't imagine with how much you loved California when you were in college there that you could
Right.
come away like that. So we are talking about transformation today, about organizations and how they are going to be changing during the age of intelligence. You
Correct.
want to introduce the topic just briefly?
I do, because we're not really talking about transformation, we're talking about evolution. You and I have been talking for months now about the use of AI models and generative AI as a machine working with humans to raise the level and quality of work within organizations and accomplish much more. And we've also been talking about how when you bring this new machine into the organization, it takes more than what I'll call a textbook transformation. A lot of literature has been written, a lot of consultants make their livings doing this sort of work in helping an organization implement a new strategy in an organization, what's called transformation. But you and I think that the use of these machines, and note that we're calling these AI models machines and not tools because of the complexity and the vast number of uses of these AI models in organizations, is the use of these models is something that can't be captured in a traditional change or a traditional structure like that for a number of reasons. One, the technology itself is always changing. Two, there is, because these are machines and not tools, there are multiple ways that different people in the organization doing different functional work will be using these machines. And that use is going to keep changing as the users become more familiar with the machine, as they start to use the machines cross-functionally and up in what we're calling the AI insight layer. That's the layer of data and information sitting horizontally in an organization across all functions. Um, so that there's no way for us to anticipate right now, at the point where the change has to start happening, what things will look like 2 months from now, 3 months, a year from now. This is why we call it an evolutionary process, that the use of both the machine and then the organization surrounding the user and the machine will continue to evolve as the people within the company become more familiar and figure out more uses of the machine. I mean, we were talking about an example, and maybe I'll just quickly drop this in, of a microwave oven. When they first came out, people used them to reheat leftovers or warm up coffee, period. And then people started to write cookbooks on how do you cook Thanksgiving dinner in your microwave oven? How do you use your microwave oven to do all of these other tasks? So the use of this machine, the microwave oven, evolved and it's still evolving. And in fact, it's evolved a bit into different machines like air fryers or advanced toaster oven type things and so forth. That's the same type of evolution that we expect this machine, the AI model, to undergo. That right now, a lot of people are simply using it for productivity. Now, you and I have already started using it above the level of productivity to help with strategic work. And we think that as more and more people become familiar with the tool will evolve in whatever direction. We don't know right now, which is why organizations have to start thinking in terms of evolution and not simply a transformation that starts today and ends tomorrow. Somewhat long-winded, but this helps set up what we're talking about today. Because in transformations, traditionally, what happens is you look at the strategy, look at the org structure, you look at the processes, you look at the culture, and then the people. I think it's inverted. When you're doing evolution, because evolution is going to be driven by the people working with the machine, you start with the people. And you have to let the people work. You have to get them to a position where they can do this work. And we'll talk more about this in a minute. And then you touch on the culture, what culture has to support these people. And then you look at processes. How do we redo processes to support the work as it's now being done? And then finally, you look at org structure. Are we on a position where we can start to do the things we think are needed now to our organizational structure? Well, I've been talking for a while here, Tom, so why don't you jump in?
The um, the concept of a machine versus a tool is interesting. You and I have spent a fair amount of time on two things. One
Right,
is this concept of transformation and the concept of tool, and then how this capability that we're seeing that we think has incredible power and leverage
right,
uh, we think that can directly affect in a major way the value of an organization.
right.
And as a result, one of the things that you and I see here is that this capability is by its nature dynamic.
Yes,
It is not deterministic. It is predictive. It is a learning. Even itself is learning. So we talk about there's a an old sort of worn out name and not name, but label people have given organizations in the past, learning organization. So we hesitate looking backwards, but the concept is not a bad one. But it's not the organizational learning. It's really the people
right,
learning. The people are the organization, and then all the things we put around it. But fundamentally, we have to think, not have to. It's probably better if we get away from the concepts such as transformation that appears to be there's an implied static nature to transformation. You do it when you've got a major change you want to make.
right,
It's something you do. It's not something that lives as part of how you do something. It is what you do when you need to do it. And we think that is not going to work any longer because of the nature of the environment we're dealing with. So you're going from what you and I would say has a somewhat of a static nature to it, to something that has a dynamic, constant living process.
right,
And the reason we like the term evolution versus transformation is because evolution comes from the biological thought process of adaptation to changing environments. And we believe that's what you're dealing with now with this. And we think it's going to have such a leverage point. We already see it in what we're seeing in almost every aspect of what people do,
right.
that it's probably preferable to think about it that way. And how do you now react to that? And so the question then becomes, why do we think it's a machine rather than a tool? what's the distinction? And you gave a good example. The point is that a machine has an implied process.
Hmm.
You're doing something here to end up with something there, like a car is a machine. It has various aspects to it that provide a capability, the engine, the brakes, well, whatever kind of a car you have, but so maybe an engine, maybe not, maybe it's
Right,
a motor, but something that provides the energy to whatever it is the source that drives the machine.
right,
But it's a machine. It's an implied process,
right.
and that's what we're seeing with this. It can be used in a way. One of the ways it's being used in a significant way today in business and in many organizations is process automation.
Yes,
And it's automating a process. And I use one every day that automates processes, at least one process for me that's a daily process. And then I have other minor processes it does. But it is a process. So it's not a tool that just does one thing. You can use it, as you say, you can use it as an advanced search capability that provides you a more, let's say, thoughtful approach to questioning something or researching something if you know how to query it properly.
right.
Uh, so those distinctions we think are important to begin this discussion that you would like to carry us through today, this discussion about how we're moving in this era in when we're thinking about what does the organization look like in the age of intelligence. Uh, is the, are we adapting to the machine or are we driving the machine? And I think we're seeing a case of right now, we're sort of adapting to the machine when in fact, you and I contend, no, don't let that machine get in front of you. You need to be in front of that machine. You need to be leading that process. And we think another aspect of it is that much of the work on process automation is what you and I would call functional, or this vertical idea where you've got a function that figures out how can I do this to really improve my social media marketing. Boom, it can do
Mhm.
wonderful things. We use it for things like that, right?
Right,
But then there's another one that goes across the top, which is the strategic and what we call the horizontal, which is where you're lifting it up to provide you insight into the business as a whole. And
right.
that's where we think the real value will be added, the long-term value will be added to organizations for using this. So then you've got to ask yourself, and this is the net of what we're talking about today. So do you have people that will evolve into doing that, right? Doing those
Right.
things. And this will get down to a concept that I know you've got on the agenda for us to talk about is, okay, what does this mean for job loss? And why are we seeing the what you and I would consider more probably preemptive selection process rather than a post uh, productivity selection process. But that being said, I'm now going to stop my long-winded diatribe. It's not like we haven't thought about this, Deirdre, or spent much
Right,
time. And actually, you're authoring a piece on this, right? You're authoring a
right.
position
One of
paper.
my next position paper is going
Right.
to be
And if
on.
you all want to know why is Deirdre look so happy these days and excited, it's because she's finally, getting down to the original purpose of what she does, and it's getting her ideas out in the public.
Now, one of the things we were discussing yesterday is that there's no killer app in generative
Mhm.
AI, really. That in the 90s, when people were starting to use these personal computers, there was the killer app of the spreadsheet, whether Excel or whether earlier you used 1, 2, 3. And it was the killer app that drew people into using their personal computers. There was enough of an advantage in the killer app there. And then people very quickly picked up the word processing, the PowerPoint, and all of the other all of which we consider tools because they are aimed at accomplishing one thing and they do not work with you interactively. They take what you provide and help you format it and come up with answers and so forth. But when you talk about generative AI, there are the models themselves. But then what do you do with the models? There's nothing like a spreadsheet that says, okay, this is how I rub my hands and do my advanced level stuff here. This is why we say, in relation to people, that what is going to drive the organizations of the future is the people who figure out how to use these machines. That is, people developing their own killer apps, people figuring out how to interact with the machines beyond the basic stuff at the level of, say, Excel or Word or something like that. And those things would be the simple search or draft a memo or things like that. But to use it in the way that we've been doing for the past several months in our videos, which are up on YouTube. But then once people figure out how to use the machine, they're gone. You know, what I mean by that is they're moving. But the prerequisite to sitting down and playing around with one of these models, as you and I both know, Tom, because we went through this, is the mindset. Now, you and I have talked about mindset for years in terms of the mindset leaders need, the mindset managers need, you know, the mindset that young individual contributors should be developing to get them up into leadership and so forth. The mindset here is a willingness to work in a new way with a new machine, not simply a tool that in effect guides your work, but with a machine with capabilities that you have to lead in order to get it to work in a killer app way, so to speak. Um, and some of that also involves internalizing the idea that in an organization using these tools, you need to develop the horizontal layer of working across functions, the layer with the data and information and so forth. Because the way these models work is to tap into information, analyze that in ways that it would take humans a lot longer to analyze, and then see opportunities, identify possibilities, put ideas together, then for the human to work on. So that's in effect the equivalent of the killer app, a model working with a person with the mindset up in what we call the AI insight layer. That's the horizontal layer of data and information to create something else. That's what's going to be driving the use of these models toward productivity and, frankly, profitability. I mean, haven't you and I, Tom, had conversations with people recently where they say they've been selling this stuff for months and no one's making any money out of it, so no one understands why they should be adopting it? This is the way you make money out of it, by moving into what I'll call killer app mode in short term here. Now, what this is going to involve in relation to people, frankly, is rewriting job descriptions. That job descriptions are organizations are going to need to rewrite job descriptions to say, in effect, you will be developing what we call work fluency. That's the ability to work with these models and tap into the AI insight layer. You will be using work fluency, 50% work fluency, along with 50% functional expertise to work at a higher level and produce higher quality work. And then part of this is you will have to be the one, this is part of the job description, who moves your work into this new mode of working, into this new work fluency. And no leader in an organization knows enough about all of the individual jobs of the organization. Frankly, this is true. I hope I'm not shocking anyone listening to us, but no leader understands how people actually perform their jobs well enough to redefine processes, redefine org structures, redefine culture, parts of the culture, and so forth. And that's why we say this is evolution, that it's the people doing their killer app work with these models who are going to point the organization to how they can just up their game across the board. And that's what's beautiful about this. Now, I believe strongly, and you've heard me talk about this in multiple ways, that the goals, a lot of organizations do not take seriously their goal setting, review, and reward processes. I think getting these processes down, cold, and functional is a key part of this, that every individual is going to have goals, both functional and organization wide, because people are going to be working horizontally across the organization. People need to be reviewed in terms of how they're meeting both sets of goals, how they're working functionally, how they're doing with work fluency, moving into the new mode. And then the reward has to be directly in relation to the review. So these processes are essential to moving the organization to the new state it's going to evolve into, so to speak. Um, Now, a couple of points. One, let's not forget the board of directors. You and I have talked frequently, Tom, about how many boards of directors may not be keeping up with the technology, or may not be keeping up with the new thinking, or may not be able to understand this new mode. We believe it an absolute requirement that board members, board directors, learn how to work in this new mode so they can do their governance and oversight work. They cannot do that work if they don't know how the organization is evolving and how people's work is evolving. So let's not forget that. And while I'm on the subject of people here, I mean, you were the one who mentioned the job losses a while ago. It is my feeling that when people demonstrate that they have the good mindset and are willing to learn, that they're not going to be laid off, that these people will be wanted by the organization, by any organization. It's the people who resist, as in any change management, as in basic industrial age change management, people who resist are encouraged to leave the organization. People who do not develop the mindset to move into this work fluency mode will be encouraged to leave the organization. This is completely separate from the AI washing we're seeing right now at the tech companies. What happened at the company, what's happening at these companies is they need new skills and they need them immediately. So they're dumping old skills and trying to find the new skills to come in. They're not necessarily always having success in bringing in new skills because there aren't that many people with these new skills. So I think the whole discussion about jobs and job losses has a lot more nuance than you'll see on the headlines on the newspapers. But anyway, my turn to stop again, Tom, and let you talk about people before I move on to culture.
I think the characteristics of people who are fundamentally curious, Deirdre, that they're fundamentally curious and they're looking to improve,
Mhm.
and that'll be what I think we'll see. The the application of these capabilities are in two directions. They're functional and they're horizontal or
Right.
flow oriented. And we use the term flow because it's flowing from from the front of the organization to the back. And then what you're looking for are people who can figure out how do we fit into that bigger flow and how do we contribute to that and how can we learn from it and improve what we're doing. Our part of that contribution
Mhm.
to the output of the organization and also the feeding of the proper information to the organization. So that's the first characteristic we're seeing. The second is that as you start to do this, you are on the point of the evaluation system and the compensation systems. And to expand a little on that one, what you're getting at that we've talked about before, not on these podcasts, but you and I have talked about, is that you're now looking at 50% of the responsibility of the person to be sort of traditional. It's that functional responsibility, right? Because this only works if everything still works, right? Well, everything still has to work. And
Right.
people still need to be able to execute as they have been executing. So half of the business is going to still need to be there to make sure it works, at least for the moment, right? And over time, yes, there'll be process automation that will improve and be able to let the lower half of the skill set rise and take over larger jobs, we think. But again, it'll be the curious people that want to improve and want
Right.
to rise in the organization. And then there is the vertical part. And how do you change that compensation system and that evaluation system and that incentive system to properly do that? And I know just in my own use of these, because I use a a model every single day to help set my plan for the week and the month, and then the priorities for what I do and how did I do yesterday and all that. Well, one of the things you realize is that you have to be a little more precise on your planning and a little less precise on your evaluation against that plan because the conditions are changing so rapidly that what you thought about, like this morning, when very early in the morning when I do the week's plan and I set it in stone and say, okay, there's what I'm going to do for the week, that I actually am able to achieve it, not because of my desire to achieve it, but because of the external conditions that are going on that cause me to have to modify and replan. And so then the question becomes, okay, how well did I anticipate that? And this is the concept we've gotten at and we talk about in Ahead of the Machine. It's that ability to predict, not forecast, but predict. So what is this week going to be like? You actually were helping me try to get a sense of that because I got a little concerned when I started looking at what I did last week,
Right.
and I can't keep that up for this week. And
Right.
you said, Tom, you don't have to, right? You're not getting a seminar on Saturday and all this other kind of stuff.
Right.
So, and then we had the workshop on Sunday. Uh, but just making sure that you can see that as part of what you're doing. So you have to change how you look at planning
Hmm.
and evaluation against that plan because what really matters is in the end, what did you accomplish?
Right.
And fundamentally, that's what you're looking at, not the plan, but did you accomplish what you needed to? And we both have done this long enough. You can't just say, okay, here's what I'm going to do by the end of the week. If you do that, you won't get it done because you'll miss everything in between. So you have to do some level of planning. So that I think is going to be exciting, right? That's a great, exciting thing for a CFO or somebody that works in measurements and logistics to try to figure out, okay, what is that? What does all that mean?
Right.
Or when you're trying to figure out this question of, okay, so how do I now put in place an incentive system and a reward system
Right.
that takes into account these factors that we're talking about? Or like you said, how do you actually write something up that helps tell somebody what it is they're doing, why they're doing it, right? And then it becomes a lot of you have to really learn how to lead at a very early stage in your career,
Hmm.
way earlier than you and I would mostly think people have to learn to lead.
Right.
So when you're working with these models, and we talk about this in great detail in many of the past podcasts we've done, but there's an element of three things. When you and I think about, okay, what is the most important or what are the most important things that a leader can do? It's to define what you want done, why you want it done, and when you want it done, right? Or you could actually, many times, it's what, when, and then why, right?
Hmm.
But that's really important to be able to do. When you work with these intelligent layers of models as they get more and more sophisticated, you're better off starting there and not defining your point about process, right? I was
Yeah.
getting to the point about process. You actually don't want to tell it what the process is.
Right.
You want to say, here's what I need, here's when I need it, here's why I'm doing this in a very thoughtful and precise and well thought through way, just
Right.
like a great leader does.
Right.
Have that very clear and be able to communicate that. And if you can communicate that well to a really good model, and we've got 5 or 6 of them available in the world today, maybe 6 or 7, you can let it come back and tell you how it would propose to do it, or modify your thinking, or change, ask you, do you really want it that way? How about this? And so forth. And that's that part we talk about where you're engaging with the machine to try to learn what the machine knows and try to put it in the right place so it can help you. But I would say there's an awful lot of leading that has to go on there, because even the thing I was working on this morning, which was an automation of something, it did a great job, but I had to actually lead it to a slightly different approach because it was going to get caught up in too much precision in an area that was going to hang it up. And that's one of the problems with these models. They can get caught up in too much precision too in at the wrong place. And so you have to learn this concept of leadership just as you would if you were managing 100 people or 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000. So that's an exciting, I mean, these are exciting things. And if you
Very.
have these capabilities and you really want to learn to use them, no matter what your age is, if you've got the energy and the desire, you can step way in front of so many other people. Unfortunately, a close friend of mine is going through this at the company that she works. She's an engineer, and she's worried she's going to be laid off and all this. And then she's finding that they're coming to her on the side saying, well, hold on just a minute. Just follow through here because we have something else planned for you. Right. I mean, because, she's that way.
Right.
So you can see what's going on in these industries, but you can also see the people like her that are switched on, want to adapt, want to learn, want to do better, are curious. Okay, I've given enough. I've taken enough of this. Unfortunately, Deirdre, you're coming up with really good stuff to talk about. So I'm going to let you now take it
Oh,
and move it
we're
on.
just we're just getting going here now. But I do want to point out, Tom, that everything that you were saying right there points to what we keep saying, that everyone's going to have to up their game. That there's no more coasting in a job, there's no more quiet quitting, there's no more just, operating at a medium level. That's not going to get you into the way that work is going forward. You have to get your mindset around using the new technologies to develop your job and work toward your set of goals actively. Now, part of this is culture, and I'm drifting into the topic of culture now. You mentioned learning organizations
Oh
earlier,
gosh,
and I
yes.
remember back in the 90s when we all were saying, we're a learning organization here, and we are something because we're a learning organization. And of course, no one knew what that meant, and no one did anything with it. So the whole idea just dissipated. But I am saying now that the whole concept of learning organization needs to be resuscitated as part of the evolution here, because people and organizations continually are going to have to learn going forward. And the reason they are is that for example, the technologies are continuing to evolve. Not only are the capabilities of the models changing by the release, but also there are additional emerging technologies. I mean, how many times have you heard the word quantum lately, Tom? More frequently in the past month than you have in the past 5 years. So more things are happening out there, and the people with the good mindsets will stay on top of it. Additionally, remember that there's going to be the expectation that people are tapping into this horizontal AI insight layer, the layer of data and information, so they can get higher level output from the work they do. And because of the interaction between the human and the machine, where the machine does some work and then the human critiques and revises and provides more context and then finalizes the product, the human needs to be functioning at the learning level of the AI insight layer to be able to understand the output that the machine has generated. Also, I think the more that people get into using these machines as part of the evolution, they're just going to be fascinated by everything they can do and use the machines in increasingly innovative, creative ways to do the higher level work. This is learning. This is an attitude of learning throughout the organization. It's an attitude of keeping your mindset up to date. It's the attitude of understanding that your quality of work has to be first rate. And part of that, I'll point out, is if people are no longer caught in their functional silos, but are up there doing work at the cross-functional level for the whole organization, then everyone in the organization is going to depend on a certain quality of work from everyone. No one wants a sub performer to provide merely adequate information into the AI insight layer. That harms the quality of the layer. So everyone has to be working at that layer of at that level of quality where you can contribute your data, your information, your judgments, your insights at the level expected by everyone in the organization. Quality is not just a motto, it's going to become an important focus and I believe a critical component of your review processes is this person delivering quality work. Um, I think that another thing that you're going to see in terms of culture, remember we're talking about culture now, is given the horizontal layer and the nature of people working cross organizations or organizational functions, you're going to see a lot more cooperation. You're going to see people talking to people actually in other silos. And that for a lot of corporations is revolutionary. You know, you're going to see people seeing the same information up at the up in the layer and needing to work together to make sense of it, and then both creating a product so they can move on with it. I think this cooperation is going to be involve working toward the same goals. Remember, everyone's working toward the organizational goals as well as their functional goals. But I think you're also going to see, and this is a mildly structural thing, but I'm going to bring it in here because we're talking cooperation. I think we're going to see a lot more work groups, a lot more teams, a lot more interaction, a lot of it not formalized. People may just get together and say, I see you're working with the same information. Let's sit down for over lunch and discuss this. A lot more of that sort of work happening so that people are learning from each other, another characteristic of a learning organization. Another aspect to this, and I'll come back to this later in this presentation, it's something we've mentioned before, is along with this new type of work, this new substance of work, there are going to be needed new measurements of the quality and results of performance. And we've said that traditionally the CFO has owned financial metrics, which have been the determinant of success in an organization. I think that whole old way of doing things, that's an industrial age structure, is going to have to change in the age of information, where you're going to be driven by metrics on meeting goals, delivering results, providing value to the marketplace in multiple ways, not just the same old financial aspects, although, yes, those will always be measured. So that's part of the culture, and people need to internalize it. It's not as if, well, we've made as many sales as we need to this month, so we're done. No, you keep working toward the different metrics that you have. And for many organizations, that's a big shift. A good part, I think, of this is that this new way of working is going to disrupt traditional office politics. That the power base is going to change. No more who you know, no more how many backs you can stab in the organization. It's going to be How well are you working in a human-machine partnership and with others and cooperating with others to deliver organization-wide goals? That's going to be the big man in the organization, not the backstabber, not the person who knows how to, quote, work the system, and so forth. And I consider this a very good part of this whole evolution in an organization. So I'll stop here and let you jump in.
This idea of a learning organization, it's important for those of us that are thinking about this to make sure that when we say that, when Deirdre says a learning organization, she's referring to the people
Yeah,
that make up not this amorphous thing called an organization, because we think that is going to change in what it looks like and how it feels. We think you're going to reduce the layers and it's going to be a lot flatter, and it's going to have a different type of expectation of the people doing the work, which is all going to be exciting. And you just made that point, Deirdre, about the CFO role is going to have a set of functional fundamentals that'll still be there. That'll still be 50% of their job. But the other is figuring out how do we more effectively measure this idea of delivering value to the marketplace and then getting receiving the value back in surplus compared to what we're contributing, and
right.
then driving growth. And that's going to be a pretty exciting thing for that field, I think. The There's another thought in here, and it's we don't want to lose the fact that we talk about process here, and we think process is going to be critical to it's critical today. It makes everything work. It provides scalability and the ability to grow. So process is critical, and we cover that in our writings, and it's in Ahead of the Machine, and there's a whole process aspect to it. So we think that's going to be a major contributor to doing this, is how do you define processes and work processes and automate those processes and use those processes to drive your scalability and your
Yeah,
growth and your value exchange
right.
with the marketplace. So that'll evolve and need its own process and measurement. But to begin that, you have to start, not have to, it's important to think in terms of first principles. What is the lowest level fundamental that drives this process? And get to that point before you begin asking the machine to automate this or put some kind of an automation in place or process in place with automation to do that. So a lot of these things that capabilities that were developed, a lot of it in supply chain will still be really valuable, but they need to be, just like you and I are talking about in the leadership and the management side, they need to be turned and forward facing. Is how do we use these concepts to help do the work that needs to be done, not how do we transform this organization into that way of thinking. It's not a backward movement, that it's constantly looking forward and adapting to the future and the leverage of the future. I'm going to turn that back over to you because I've got way too many notes here, Deirdre, that I could just keep going as I know you have too. So,
There's so much to talk about here. Process is actually the third part of the evolution. Remember, we talked about people and culture and process and structure. So you've glided into process, and I will too. Now, processes in many traditional organizations are used to restrict. They're used to channel work, and heaven help you if you try to work outside of a process. That is not going to be good in the new type of organization we're moving to, which is an evolutionary organization where things are constantly changing. I think people are going to have to think of processes in a different way. They're guidelines. They're tied in with the culture. They're tied in with what type of organization are we? What are our general rules of working with each other? What are our general rules in relation to our marketplace and our customers? And then how do we get there? Allowing people to get the guidance they need to move together in the corporation in the right direction, but also to be able to develop their use of, say, the generative AI or other types of AI or other technologies that they're going to be using so that their work evolves to keep up, to keep fresh. And this is actually part of the learning. A lot of people are very comfortable with very tight guide rails. Part of learning to work in these new entities, these new organizations, is learning to develop the freedom of movement to move in the right direction. Yes, with guidance and with managers who will help you and so forth, but you don't have processes as restrictions in there. Processes are needed, frankly, about the use of the machine itself. You and I believe that there should be standardization about which of the models to use. As you said, there are 6 or 7 good ones out there, and you and I have shown that they have different capabilities. They've been programmed in different ways, different vocabularies, different forms of output. A serious decision needs to be made that we will use models 3 and 7 of this range of 7 models. And you can use either 3 or either 7 but their work is complementary and it's similar enough so that we don't run into any problems with quality assurance, with risks. Risks come up when people use different models that come out with different let's not forget about that. So some selection of models needs to be made from that criteria. Similarly, decisions need to be made about the form of output and the final product. Now, you and I we've already talked today about the 5-step process that we believe guides people's work with these machines, starting with the research that the machine does. Then the human looks at that research, then that human provides more context, then the machine synthesizes, but then the human takes that synthesis and creates the final output based on that human's knowledge, judgment, instincts, and so forth. There needs to be a process standardizing what I've just outlined, that you don't simply go in and ask a question and pull that out of the machine and turn it in as final work. That's just the beginning of the whole process. And that's not allowed. That you need to work through the whole 5 steps of the process so you come up with useful output that's worthy of being put up in the AI insight layer for the whole corporation. Slight shift here. We can't forget about agents. There's a lot being talked about agents and so forth. And you and I have talked in previous videos about the limitations of agents at the moment. There need to be processes around when agents are used in the organization, in what processes, what needs to happen organization-wide. If one process gets an agent, does that affect other processes? Another aspect of this is an agent just as one part of a process. Agent architectures may do more of a process. There needs to be a protocol for when an agent is added to this architecture and who is allowed to do it. You can't have just anyone in the organization seeing a model suggest that, hey, I could use an agent here, and just dropping that into a process without having some sort of quality assurance review, risk review, and so forth. So that's really where the processes need to be, really surrounding what could badly affect the work of the organization, create risks, create quality issues, and so forth. And then, of course, processes need to be in place, as we've been talking about the goal setting, the review, the rewards, about the assessment of work. Like, how are you going to assess the results that are being generated in the course of strategy execution? What criteria are you going to see? How are you going to make adjustments in it? How are you going to then drop in the measurements? And what are you going to do as a result of the measurements? Those are the sorts of processes, not along the lines of, well, every report needs to be put in a binder with X number of tabs and so. No, that's irrelevant going forward. But you need to have the processes in place to generate the top level quality that the organization wants to deliver in the marketplace. I'll stop on processes for a minute and see what else you want to say on this.
I want to come back, if I could, Deirdre, to the point about security of these models. And there was an article written just this past weekend by somebody you and I value in the tech world. And his point was there are certain models I would not use today because they do not value the privacy of your data when you use them and haven't from beginning. And Now you and I don't use that model that he's talking about, but and we don't use the other one either. But because we know this,
Right.
but we're
Absolutely.
fortunate that
We
we've
know
known
this.
this for a very long time.
Yes.
Uh, but we can't lose sight of the fact that as you do this work and you become more invested in doing it, you're going to start asking that question. What
Yeah.
kind of what are we doing here in terms of how public are we making some of our data?
Right.
And then the question of do I want to own that model, right? Do I want to bring it inside, run it in my own instance, and all this? And there was a lot of good practice that's been going on there, especially in high secure environments. And so there's a lot of good work there. We don't need to help on that. There are plenty of people that know how to do that really well. But it's something to consider because now, as we keep moving this capability down into the different scalable organizations, the small to medium business, for example, which I know they don't call it that today, but whatever they want to call themselves. Those people are adapting these today because they can just use them that are commercially available. They don't need to be installing them
Right.
necessarily, just using these models. And it's really important to know, is your data secure? Is your
Right.
data safe? Because we can't lose sight of the fact that sometimes a large aspect of how these models become useful to you is to take and learn from the way you're using it. So they're fundamentally taking the information you're providing and using it to teach itself. And we've talked for a very long time about how these models are trained. It's not a static process. It's a constantly updated and evolving process. And I'm sure, and those of you that followed this very early on, over a year ago, year and a half ago, when they first started to become visible in the marketplace, you had to think about, well, how current is the data that they're trained on? Because it may be 3 months old, it may be 6 months old. So you couldn't ask a relevant near term question. And we were doing some work to help a friend of ours who's a serial entrepreneur, and I just showed him how to do some strategy work. Did it, I think it was in January, and then did it again in March, I think.
Right.
And we got brand new data that one of the competitors had launched a new product line last week. Well, nobody in their business knew it, and he's a leader in the industry. But now the data is not that it doesn't have that time issue as frequently unless you decide to impose it.
Right.
So this is becoming now, as these things scale and rise up in their contribution to an organization, it's going to become ever more a question that has to be answered, which is the downside. There's one other aspect to this, Deirdre, that I'd like to talk about because on the process side, and it's that again, as we talk about here, there are two things going on, we think, in the organization of the future, and they're going to have equal weight. There's going to be a process driven functionally there are some fundamental things that most every organization does today that needs to be done and done precisely. The
Mhm.
numbers, if the numbers aren't right and they're not current and they're not happening in the cycle that's being demanded by the business to be able to run, which we think is going to become ever more granular and ever more rapid, then it's not going to work. So you need those functional capabilities and you need those processes that run them. But what
Mhm.
we're talking about is now that's no longer going to be the bulk of what an organization does. What is going to happen is that's going to be about 50%, and the other 50 is how well do you tie them together. And so what you're looking for in these processes is processes that do both and do them well and know how to feed in to that process ultimately at the top of the business that delivers the value to the marketplace and receives it back from the marketplace. That's going to be a huge element of the people that are sitting in the functional what we traditionally would have thought of as functional roles.
Right.
We think in the future the organization is going to look a lot more like, instead of having an organization of 100 people in a function or 1,000 people in a function, it's going to be a handful of people in a function being and with these capabilities. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't have a handful here and a handful there and a handful there, and you figure it. So you may end up with 100 people, but they're dealing with the subject differently, and that's what we're talking about here. It's that it'll be that value that not only executing functionally, but also executing horizontally or the workflow. How does it fit that? And how do we effectively fit it to scale and grow and do it effectively to drive value? So that's an aspect of this. Again, with process, yes, but it looks both ways. It looks that way and that way, or really that way, this way, and then how does that fit into this way
Right.
when we draw it out? So, but I wanted to make that point, Dieter, because again, we spend a lot of time on this horizontal piece,
Right.
but it's critical that people realize the vertical piece still has to happen. It just, instead of being 80 or 90% of what somebody does, or even 95%, it's going to become about 50%. And the other is going to be driving the organization. So we spend more time on the horizontal, but it will need to be equivalently well done.
Okay.
So I'll let you pick up now. We've reached now that I crossed over into close to an hour here, Deirdre. I'm going to turn it over to you to land the airplane for us.
Well, we cannot stop until we discuss organizational structure.
Oh yes, of course.
So, now, anyone who's been following what we've been talking about realizes that you can't start with organizational structure. That has to be the very last thing. In fact, organizational structure is going to be evolving even as the whole organization evolves. No more rigid charts of all of this. I am going to suggest right now, and just very quickly suggest, a couple of points of org structure. One is that there's likely to be an elimination of information transfer roles. Those are the roles where people from one function wandered into another function and said, let me give you some information. If the information is up in the AI insight layer, the horizontal layer of data and information, those roles will not be needed. Not that we're going to get rid of those people will be repurposed. Those people may be running coordinating roles across functions or some other leading teams across functions or something like that. There will be work needed to be done that these people can do. But likely the information transfer as a role will be eliminated. Similarly, there'll be a reduction of layers. If everyone is going to be working horizontally instead of vertically, then some of these vertical layers will become compacted. The information transfer people repositioned. Some of the other people just overseeing work will likely also be repositioned. in some ways. But those people may become involved in making the horizontal layer work. I'm trying to reassure people that we're not just going to say, oh, X layer is fired. There's going to be a lot more work. And in fact, installations of AI in the way we're describing it are showing that jobs are created when these installations are done, simply because there are more roles with the coordination with making sure things are happening, so forth. So it's not just, it may be a misspeaking to talk about elimination of layers. Maybe it's just a reconfiguring of people, not a reinstitution or renaming of layers. It's just that the work gets done in a different way with people guiding the work. Another thing that's going to be happening is with all of this reconfigure, there's going to be a change in reporting responsibility. No more hierarchical in a function. That's vertically, but that people are going to at least have dotted line relationships all over the place. We're working on the same information. We're working toward the same goals. I need to bring part into what your team is working on over here. And so people will report in different directions. This is going to be part of the revising of the goal setting, review, and reward processes. How will people execute on all of their reporting responsibilities, upward and downward here, providing guidance to get the work done? And I've already mentioned that there'll be a lot more coordinated work in terms of more teams, more work groups, more special purpose groups, all of these cross-functional. This is just the beginning of the thinking about org structure. The idea is you don't transform an organization from one rigid org structure into another rigid org structure. Rather, in the terms of evolution, this rigid org structure evolves and keeps evolving into a structure that makes sense to get the work done. This is another reason why everyone needs to up their games, including leaders and the board of directors, that the more evolution, the more fluidity, the more work fluency in a situation, the more awareness, the more ability to predict, project, coordinate there. All new types of skills. And unfortunately, for the people who just like to coast along, the less coasting. Those people are going to lose their value in an organization that puts primacy on the ability to adapt, change, grow, coordinate, and evolve with the work. We've actually dropped a lot of ideas and a lot of terms on people, Tom. I think this may be a time where we let people take a breath and let us take a breath and absorb this. I'm going to be writing at least one position paper on the topics we've been covering, which I'll be posting in the Deep Business Initiative Substack, which is where these position papers can be found. So people wanting additional thinking or wanting to comment on this can do so over in our Deep Business Initiative Substack. What else would you like to say on this topic?
So the final topic that I'd like to take a moment on, Deirdre, is the one of the effect on the human here.
Yeah,
Because having lived this, these capabilities, if you start to use them well, you can exhaust yourself. We've talked about this problem before, right?
oh
Where
yeah,
you can find yourself trying to do way more than you should.
right,
And so this is why you and I are so convinced this stuff drives more and more work. It drives more and more things, more and more opportunity to do new
right,
things and do different
right,
things. With that, there's the part about making sure that you are not exhausting yourself in the process of doing this and spending too much time on the wrong things.
right,
That you make sure that you're dealing with the other parts that make life fun and enjoyable to live. And
right.
we joke about this somewhat, but it really is important. And you all that follow us know Deirdre does a better job than I do on this, but we're working on me. but the that part of it is really important. But it comes back to Deirdre, this point about that you have to develop your role in this, which is to lead. You have to lead this machine and you have to lead yourself. And they're two different things. And but it requires clarity of thought, that ability to predict. You have to be able to lead. And the one of the things these machines do so well is take away a lot of the work that we used to have to do in synthesis, because they really do a good job in that and making sure that you use that to help you in this personal side. So when we say up your game, we're talking about applying that leadership to the machine. That's what we're talking about. And up your ability to lead it well and understand it so thoroughly that you can lead it effectively and lead it well, and then also lead the people in the process. And as a result, the organization. So I will leave it there, but I think you have something you want to get off your mind before we close this off, or was that just a signal to me that I think we've done enough damage today?
I think I like your thoughts there at the end, Tom. I think that's a good place to stop. I mean, you and I both have lots more to say on this, but I think that's a good stopping point that even while we're talking about the machine, you as a human need to stay human
Yes.
in the whole process, not let yourself be absorbed into the machine or into developing new processes. That I hope we're conveying that this new work that we're describing, frankly, is fun.
Yes.
It's challenging, yes, but it's good challenge. And it's a good way for you to demonstrate your ability, your capabilities, the reason you should get a raise, and all of those other
Right.
things you want to do
Exactly.
in the workplace. And yes, stay human while you're doing this, but also see it as an opportunity and not as something to be feared.
Dear, it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Tom, seeing you there in Yosemite. Bye.